Welcome back to Pure Prison, everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Jeffrey Deskovic right on in here. He is going to be featured at the Vanguard Awards. So this is super exciting for me. You guys, he's got an amazing story. You're not going to believe it. This is going to be a two-parter, probably. I love you guys. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm super excited today just to be interviewed by you. It's going to be a wonderful time. We'll talk about many different things, and by the time everyone gets done listening to this one, hopefully they'll have learned at least one new thing. But I suspect it'll be several.
I love it. Packed full of information. And listen, if anybody's got it, you've got it. I can't even tell you. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about just whatever, and then we're going to go in.
Sure. So my name's Jeffrey Deskovic. I'm the founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which frees wrongfully convicted people. And pursues policy changes aimed at preventing that from happening in the first place. So to date, we've been able to free 11 wrongfully convicted people. We've helped pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. I'm an advisory board member of the national coalition group called It Could Happen to You. And we were able to pass an additional 5 laws as well, on all in three different states. I sit on the Global Advisory Council for Restorative Justice International, advising them on wrongful conviction issues and other broader criminal justice reform issues. I have a master's degree from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. My degree is in criminal justice. My master's thesis is on wrongful conviction.
Look at my mouth right here. I'm just like, there's going to be a lot of animated stuff going on.
So let me tell a little bit more, and then we'll jump in. I just want to give just a tease more.
Please.
Thank you. Just a tease more, and okay. So I'm also a board member for the National Justice Impacted Bar Association, which paves the way for formerly incarcerated people to enter the legal profession and support them once they're there. Once they are attorneys, I'm very active in broad justice reform issues. And, this is really my life work. And I come to all of this because this happened to me. I spent 16 years in prison for murder and rape, which I did not commit. I was arrested at 16. I turned 17 by the time the trial started, which I lost. So I did spend the 16 years wrongfully in prison for murder and rape. And ultimately, I was exonerated through further DNA testing about 14 years ago, which not only exonerated me, but identified the actual perpetrator. And so that's why I come to do all of this advocacy work. But I do have that unique perspective that is based not only on my personal experience, but also my formal education.
Listen, you blow my mind. I could not wait to have you on here. Let me tell you something. And I just want the audience to hear this one more time. 16.
Mm-hmm.
16. Did you hear all of the stuff at the end of his name? That is amazing. I love it. You got out. You didn't forget. You made changes. You helped change laws to save people. Now, you've got such a beautiful perspective, likewise, because you've been inside of the gates and outside. Now, you touched on something, and we've got so much to talk about because you're just such a great and interesting person. You're so many facets to you. But I love that you touched on the subject of reentry and helping reentering citizens go back into the profession or into that field. How difficult was that?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult because, first of all, as far as the associate's degree and the bachelor's degree, and first of all, most of the other people trying to get into the law school, a lot of them came from like top 10 schools and, privileged backgrounds. And meanwhile, my background was from age 17 to 32. I was incarcerated. I'm really happy with Corning Community College, really happy with Mercy College. At the same time, these are not Ivy League schools either, so it's a modest background. And then in addition to that, law school the grades are on a curve, meaning that teachers, when they grade the papers, they give the raw score and then they compare everybody's grade and answers to everyone else's. And so your 85 might drop down to a 72, or you might go 90. That's called grading on a curve.
That's
So
a big curve.
So in that way, I really was competing against people half of my age while also doing law school and while also doing justice reform work and advocacy full time. So it was very difficult. And with respect to other formerly incarcerated people, many of whom are on parole, who did their crime, did their time, and now are committed to a crime-free life that makes a difference. Hence, wanting to go to law school in the first place. Beyond those same obstacles that they would have shared with me, they have the additional burden that they have the criminal record as well. See, I didn't have a criminal record because I was exonerated. My record was expunged, but they would have a record, and so that is a significant barrier with respect to getting into law school, and with respect to actually getting the license, what they refer to as the character and fitness. So those all are significant obstacles, and hence my having an interest in paving the way for justice impacted people to enter the legal profession. And I think that, they have a lot of meaningful contributions to make in the same way that they have made impact on policy issues on things like, prison reform, prisoner reentry, crime prevention, working in nonprofit settings, sometimes with homeless. So the same way they've contributed in that way, I know that they could make meaningful contributions in the legal field, hence wanting to facilitate the way for them and, doing my part in that, hence joining that organization and, helping advise and carry out various initiatives.
You're amazing. Now, and it's so, when I think about someone who's been inside, actually being an attorney or anything in that field, it's just so amazing because they've been there and they've seen how bad the system can be and how much it can let you down, and the wrongs, and to be able to go out and correct them. It's great. Let's go on to this foundation of yours. Tell me about that, because I was looking that up a little while ago and yesterday. Beautiful.
So when I was released, I gave an off-the-cuff presentation, everything I'd ever wanted to say in 16 years, but could never quite get anyone to hear. So I held the media there for 2.5 hours. And at that moment, the light bulb went off and I realized I could be part of the innocence movement without necessarily being a lawyer. So for about 5 years, I did individual advocacy work. I was speaking across the country. I became a weekly columnist where I wrote about criminal justice issues. I became a quasi-public figure, meaning I took that initial hit of 5 minutes of fame from the exoneration and I kept the media coverage going. So I kept that going. And, of course, that meant trading privacy in exchange for greater awareness of issues, with the hope that that awareness would lead to policy changes. And I was regularly meeting with elected officials. So I did that while pursuing I got a scholarship from Mercy College to finish the bachelor's, because I had come within 30 credits of the bachelor's degree while incarcerated wrongfully before funding was cut. So I got the associates and I completed another. So basically I accumulated 90 credits while wrongfully incarcerated, and then funding was cut for prisoners. So Mercy College gave me a scholarship to finish that. And I also decided that I would springboard from that to get a master's degree, again, feeling like the extra credential would facilitate my advocacy initiative. So that was the next logical move. After 5 years, a difficult reentry, we'll talk about that in a different segment of the conversation, but having difficulties still on the reentry stuff. But at some point after the 5 years, I did get compensated, and I decided that I wanted to take my advocacy work to the next level. Hence, so I took $1.5 million from what I got, and I started the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice because I wanted to continue the policy work and awareness I was doing as an individual, but I wanted to get involved in helping to free people, and I could never do that on my own, hence starting the foundation. And as I mentioned at the opening, we have been able to get people out from prison who are wrongfully incarcerated, and it was easier to push policy changes while having a nonprofit.
Absolutely.
So at some point, though, it became not enough for me to sit in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table. I wanted to be able to represent some of the clients. I wanted to be able to make some of the arguments. hence making a foray into law school and becoming an attorney. Plus I figured that the additional credential again would further assist the policy changes that I've pushed, and it really has worked that way. And I've been able to get a lot more ears, hearts, and minds, which I need to get the message out in order to fix the justice system. Really broken from A to Z,
Yes.
and I want to be heard on those issues. And being a lawyer facilitates that. It gives me extra additional credibility. So everyone understands clearly that my views are not shaped only by my own experience, but also my formal education, the master's degree, and now the law degree, being an attorney.
Yes.
So that was why I did all of that, all in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as a lawyer.
I love it. Now, and I do, I'm in contact with college behind bars, a couple other colleges that go behind the walls and create campuses pretty much. And it is an amazing thing when someone I can't believe how many credits you got. That's a lot of time. And I can't imagine trying to fit that into a day of prison. That's just amazing to me.
Yeah, it definitely was difficult, but I had to remain focused. And then it wasn't just in prison, but balancing that while in prison, while also fighting for my freedom, because,
Right.
I was, I'm not just sitting there waiting for the parole board. I'm trying to clear my name and come home as a exonerated free person. So I had to balance my legal work with being with college stuff. So it was not easy, but look, it was worth it. And I tried to orient everything I did while I was in prison to having some kind of potential benefit on the outside. And I want to just briefly take a half second here just to share
Yes.
that in terms of college education, for prisoners, I'm a really big proponent of that. I benefited from that tremendously. I had that much less ground to cover once I was released. I saw the impact that it had on other prisoners. I mean, people went from talking about war stories, talking about crimes and chasing women and drugs and street life and, terrible plans for the future as to how we're going to get that robbery scheme done right this time. We'll take into account. Conversations went from that to people discussing dreams of being drug counselors or working with at-risk youth or other meaningful occupations that this college education would enable them to. And it only makes sense because if somebody's perspectives have been broadened, if we're equipping them for gainful employment, that's all the positive benefits from that. And they housed us all in one block. It was the college block, and we kind of formed a community in there as well. So the normal communication barriers and negativity that normally would be a part of everyday prison life simply were greatly reduced, or if not eliminated altogether by I wouldn't have to know you, Shy, or even like you in order to help tutor you in one subject or another, help you with one homework, or
Absolutely.
and that was what it was about in the college block. And last point I'll make on that is that the rhetoric and rationale that was involved with reducing funding for college, eliminating rather college education for prisoners, it was all a fallacy and rhetoric that had no real weight. So the argument went, well, why should we give college education for prisoners when I don't go to school for free? I can't afford to send my son or daughter to free. Here's how that's a fallacy. First of all, I filled out the financial aid forms. I went to college on Pell and Tap. So the financial aid forms were the same, whether a prospective student was incarcerated or if they were not. So the forms were the same. So nobody who would be ineligible to go to college on a grant while free would suddenly be able to go to college while in prison just because they were incarcerated. So that was one aspect of it that was false. And the second thing was it was a very low percentage of total students across the country that were going to school on grants who were incarcerated, very small percentage relative to the number of students going to college that were not incarcerated. So my point in saying that is that it's not like for every prisoner who went to college on a grant, there was someone on the outside who was denied a seat. And lastly, we're talking about, as a society, spending some money on the front end in order to avoid spending even more money on the back end. So I remember some years ago, and this number is going to vary from state to state, but I remember some years ago, the then governor of New York mentioned that it was like 72,000 or more, somewhere in that ballpark, per year to incarcerate somebody. But if you spend a fraction of that, would we rather to do that? Because that's really what's going to happen. There's a 68% recidivism rate nationally. So if we return prisoners back to society with no education, which is going to impact it, right? So they're going to wind up getting no jobs or dead-end jobs. That's going to increase the likelihood of returning back to crime, economic crimes, which is ultimately going to lead to another set of victims and reincarceration. So we want to spend $70-something thousand a year, or would rather spend a little bit of money on the front end, of save that money on the back end, while also gaining money through paying into the tax base. So that was a no-brainer of a thing, and it's terrible that it was cut, but thank God now that they did repass. But let's see it implemented. I can't wait for it to get widespread back like it was. So, I mean, I'm a tremendous supporter of college education for prisoners for all those reasons that I just laid out.
Absolutely, and one of the biggest reasons is hope.
Yes,
it's hope. You give someone back their hope. And like you said, I love that you said their thoughts went from, because that's cognitive behavior. And also they felt a little bit safer, I believe.
Yes.
Because I've been in kind of a situation in a therapeutic community while incarcerated. And it's beautiful to see when people start remembering what they wanted to be or who they were supposed to be, and they get that back. I think that's a beautiful, amazing thing. Now, I know that we talked about your foundation. What is the, I know that you have a link that we're going to be putting up right now. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so there's a crowdfunding site called Patreon, and it's different from other crowdfunding sites like GoFundMe or Indiegogo, in that Patreon is for people who are willing to be recurring monthly donors. It's not someone that wants to do like a one-off, one-time donation. So I have the page there in order to support the foundation's work. Let it be known that all told, I wound up, putting in about $3 million of my own money into this. But I can't self-fund the entity. We do have 10 cases active now. We have another 7 that are approved that we don't have the capacity to move. So we would like to increase the number of people we could work on freeing. We would like to be able to do policy work in more than just New York, Pennsylvania, and California. We would like to go into 3 more states and do something nationally.
Florida.
And so, yeah, Florida is one of the states that we would go into. There's a lot of advocates and people waiting for us to come into Florida, waiting for us. So Patreon is a way for us to build our capacity. So imagine for a minute, what if 25,000 people, what if 100,000 people were willing on a recurring monthly basis, not a one-off, but recurring monthly basis, $3 or $5 a month. That would give us a really big budget, which would increase our capacity, to free people and do these policy changes. Hence, having that crowdfunding site up there. That's what that's about.
I'm broke as a joke, but I'm in. Anything for this. Now, I cannot wait and did not know you jumped me on a surprise here on the banners. What's with this little film about you here, Jeffrey? What's going on?
The silver.
Yes, the conviction on the Amazon.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
So there's a there's a documentary short that was made about me by Gia Wirtz. This is actually her first film. Gia used to work in finance, and we met at a fundraising event for Adnan Syed what was the name of that podcast of Serial fame? So we met there, and then we met again. Well, there was a podcast called Serial, and really that's really what made the world wild with podcasts, and that was the precursor for that. That's what I mean when I say Serial fame. So the podcast is called Serial, but his story was featured there, and Gia and I met at a modest fundraising event for him where I spoke at, and then we bumped into each other again at a huge fundraising event where I was their keynote speaker at in Washington, D.C. And so Gia decided she wanted to be involved in justice reform work to leave her job in finance, and she wanted to do it through the camera rather than the legal field. And so she approached me if she could do my story. And so Conviction is different than the other documentaries that are out there, because this is about my advocacy work and life post exoneration rather than a deep dive into the legal ins and outs of my case. So that's what it's about. And on my end of it, I used the platform that I had in order to bring attention to some of the non-innocence justice reform work. My rationale was, look, it's about me. So by definition, wrongful conviction and my foundation are going to get some play. But why not use that increased platform to raise attention to many other disturbing things that I was subjected to and that I saw many other people be subjected to, things that were simply unacceptable to me, things like elderly people in prison, terrible medical care, how the medical care was particularly inept at dealing with the advanced geriatric needs, things like compassionate release, solitary confinement, over sentencing, verbal abuse by staff, the violence that goes on in prison. So I spoke about a lot of those things within Conviction. And Conviction thus far has gotten into 14 different film festivals. It's won 3 awards. So Best Documentary, Best Cinematography,
I'm
an
so
award of
happy
distinction.
for you both. That is
Thank
so
you.
great. I cannot wait to watch it. I'm driving
So
over to the other side of the state today, and I'm going to watch it. What did you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's available on that website that's going across on Amazon. So if I encourage you to watch it, and definitely leave a comment on the comment section there, because Gia and I are going to have a longer version of it. This is a documentary short, meaning it's 20 minutes, but there's going to be an hour and a half long feature that is released within a year, and it'll have other voices in it. Will round out the story more. So all the comments and all the film festivals and the awards are kind of like a proof of concept, of validation, which is all going to work on our behalf when it comes to trying to get the bigger version on the biggest platform that we possibly can, which of course helps in order to get it seen by as many people as we possibly can. So that's what's going on with Conviction.
Well, I can't wait to share the news with the audience today. Now, so what's going on? What is in the future? What's happening right now?
So in the future right now,
In the
the
future right now.
coalition, right? Well, it's right now, but also in the future, there's still stuff to do. So pardon the oxymoron there. But so so the coalition group, which I'm part of, which I'm advisory board member of, which the foundation is part of, It Could Happen to You. We recently passed and was signed into law landmark legislation in New York called the Commission on Prosecutor Conduct. So independent oversight board that could investigate allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. We passed that over like 8 years of going head to head fighting with the mighty District Attorneys Association of New York, who wanted no oversight, who insisted there was no problem at all, and that they could police their own, which is all a bunch of malarkey. So we passed that bill, and so the next step in that is commissioners need to be named, and there needs to be a budget allocated. So that's what I'm working on now and the future. There's another policy initiative in New York. So the foundation did help pass a law in New York that mandates police and videotape interrogations, but the legislature came out with this watered down version where they made exceptions for sex offenses, drug cases, and certain types of homicides. So our goal is to try to get rid of the exceptions. So that's in the future. We're working on it now, but that's definitely of the future. In terms of in Pennsylvania, our initiatives there are, first of all, exonerate compensation. So Pennsylvania is unfortunately one of 14 states that does not have compensation. So if you were wrongfully convicted in Pennsylvania and the courts exonerated you, the state would at present owe you nothing at all.
Nothing.
No.
Nothing.
So we're currently building. It's terrible. Anyone else, any other entity would have to make you would have to make restitution and compensation, make the person whole, but not Pennsylvania. So we're trying to eliminate that. And again, we want to pass we're trying to also get that oversight board in Pennsylvania. Now in California, again, the oversight board for the prosecutors, and we think there's a chance to get rid of capital punishment in California. So that's what's going on initially on the policy front. The foundation does have 10 cases, so I'm looking forward to getting those people out. I've entered some of those, three of those cases as co-counsel. So working on the dream of exonerating others as a lawyer, the longer version of the documentary as well that I mentioned to you. Recently signed a deal with the literary agent, so they're going to try to get the book, find a publisher for my book, and other things can flow from that. I can do speaking engagements at a more frequent clip. I can try to break into motivational speaking. Maybe there could be a movie down the line if the book does well. So all that's predicated on getting the book published and the book doing well. So the signing with the literary agent is a big step for that. So that certainly is in my future. Definitely trying to continue raising my my profile. So those all those things are part of my future. And look, at some point, maybe perhaps in 7 years from now, maybe I continue the advocacy work then, but I make the jump from the nonprofit sector. Maybe I run for office and try to do that within the government. So that would really be a full circle thing. So that all those things are of the future for me.
I cannot wait. One, to read the book. Two, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to have you in Florida. We need laws changed here desperately, desperately. And three, gosh, come to Florida and I'll vote for you. I love you, by the way, your American flag. I love it. Thank you so much for wearing that. That means a lot. This country means a lot.
Sure. Let me share a little bit about that. Yeah, I'm definitely proud of the country and everything that it stands for. But I just feel like too many times that as a country we don't live up to those principles. And hence doing the justice reform work on the innocence and non-innocence aspect of it. But all these things really are about justice, and they're about accuracy. It's not an anti-government, anti-cop, anti-prosecutor thing. Definitely anti-cop and prosecutor if you're rogue, if you're doing the wrong thing, if you're not respecting state and federal constitutional rights and laws and ethics and best practice. I'm coming for you if you're involved in that. You better believe I'm against you then. But at the same time, if you're doing your job in the right way, those are essential professions. And when you do your job legally, I have no issue with you. So, me personally, I'm not a defund person. If I, God forbid, I have an emergency, I don't want to be put on hold. I want there to be a police department to take the call. And I want an armed police officer showing up at the scene. I really don't want a mental health person. I do want better training to deal with people that are having mental health crisis. I insist on accountability if you do the wrong thing. So that's kind of where my position is with that, and I've been able to make headway in that. I've gotten buy-in from some segments of law enforcement. For example, for the last 7.5 years, I've co-taught the ethics class in the Bergen County Police Academy in New Jersey. I did serve on the Peekskill Police Task Force Reform Group assigned to their policy committee, where I was there with the sitting police chief and the county police officer and the detective, and we were able to get consensus on reforms. I did serve on the transition team for the Westchester DA's office for their for the incoming DA that writing memos for and pertaining to conviction review unit, which he was going to set up. So those are all examples of working with law enforcement through that justice and accuracy lens. I categorically reject the idea that it's a few bad apples. No, it's a hell of a lot more than that, or we wouldn't have all these different police brutality, unjustifiable deadly police force. We would not have all of the exonerations that have been reported thus far from the National Registry of Exonerations, which is up to 2,849 exonerations. 2,849 exonerations.
Now,
counting from 1989 forward. Just from
1989 forward, over 2,000. That's insane. Now, those are all by DNA, new testing?
No. Some of them are DNA and some are non-DNA. It's a total number of exonerations regardless of method. Absolutely. And remember that that's just those of us that have made it out. Yeah. So again, my ultimate dream is, have like a chapter of the foundation in each state and
Yeah.
ultimately in each country, because I really see wrongful conviction as a worldwide problem. And, countries where we don't hear about exonerations or wrongful conviction, it's not because they're not happening. It's simply because there's been very few to no exonerations. Nobody's working on this. Some countries, their legal system is so backwards, there isn't even an existing procedure to have new evidence even introduced to
Brought
a court.
forward. Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Could you
So
imagine? I mean, it's rough enough. We have that option, and it's like,
it's very hard
getting,
even for us. It's very
I
hard even
know,
for us. I mean, average length of wrongful incarceration, 14 years.
14
And
years.
by the time people are exonerated, it's typical that their appeals have long since been exhausted. And that's kind of like a hidden aspect of everything. It's just looking at the role of judges in allowing wrongful convictions to happen, in preserving wrongful convictions. When you look at these case summaries, whether on the Innocence Project website, the cases that are summarized, the DNA exonerations, or even that of the registry, which has all of them, including the non-DNA ones, when you read the case narratives, there were typically a lot of red flags along the way. That an identification was suggestive, or that a confession was coerced, or that an informant was lying, and yet the judges allowed the suggestive identification testimony in court. They did not suppress the clearly involuntary confessions. The appeals courts, did not reverse those convictions. So, that's all part of, the role of the judges. We need to make outreach and educate the judges as well. I mean, that's the tension in the system, the justice system, and there's two conflicts which lead to that, by the way. Those can be summarized as finality of conviction versus accuracy, and substantive justice versus proceduralism. So let me break those down real quick.
Please.
So firstly, finality of conviction versus accuracy. The competing ideas that, on one hand, look, you had your day in court, you lost. How long are we going to keep going through this? At some point, things need to be final. And in a way, there's a legitimacy to that. On the other hand, what good is a final conclusion if that final conclusion is not accurate, if it's not correct? So I think that anytime there's an objective reason to look at, revisit a case, it should be done. So
Yes.
that's procedure. That's finality of conviction versus accuracy. Now the next one,
Okay.
proceduralism versus substantive justice. So I lost in federal court, for example,
Mm-hmm.
because my attorney was given the wrong information by the court clerk, which led to my paperwork being filed 4 days too late. Yes,
Right about it.
that the court decided to just dismiss my case because I was late, without even getting into the issues of law that were being raised, without getting into my claim of innocence based on a DNA test. So what should it matter? What does it matter? I wouldn't care if I was 1,000 days late. Okay, take that up with my lawyer. I'm in prison. I have
right.
zero control over the lawyer. I don't have a legal education as well. Okay,
Right.
your remedy should be you take that up with my lawyer for not missing the deadline. You don't turn around and dismiss my case
And punish
based on
you.
that and punish me. And that ruling, by the way, which happened in 1997, that wound up costing me 9 additional years because I wasn't cleared until 2006.
My God.
It was only, very fortunate to even be exonerated that new evidence could be uncovered, because once I lost based on that, my case then only became about whether, challenging that procedural ruling, which the next 3 courts upheld that ruling, and my appeals were then done. And the only way back in the court at that point was to find new evidence. But, thanks. But how many people are
How
innocent?
many find new
People?
evidence, though?
Exactly right.
Oh,
Exactly right. Yeah. So hence the need for this issue to be, addressed, and better judging on the part of the judiciary.
absolutely. And that can happen. I don't understand why it doesn't, but I'm glad there's people like you. I love it, because statutes and bills and laws, that's really not my thing. But boy,
Right.
it does. I mean, I'm going to advocate for him, but I love that we have you and I can learn from you. I can see and I can watch. Listen, you are chock full of information. I know that we're going to be seeing each other in a couple, and not even 2 weeks yet, and
Right.
get together. Then a big thing of mine is juveniles, sentencing of juveniles. We got to work
Sure.
on.
Well, that issue certainly intersects with me with my story. I mean, I was when I was arrested at 16, I was charged as an adult. I was therefore tried as an adult, and I was given an adult sentence. 15 to life was my sentence, and I was therefore sent to a men's maximum security prison at age 17. You
17.
know,
Oh
very
my God.
fully formed adults, many of whom were guilty of committing serious violent crimes. So very dangerous situation. I had the bullseye on my back as well, because remember, I was wrongfully convicted, not simply of a murder, but also a rape.
A
And there's
rape.
vigilante mentality towards people who are
Damn it.
convicted of sex offenses. So that was always on the back of my mind. So prison was very difficult for me. I mean, there were 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings every day. There was gangs. There was a lot of other violence that didn't involve weapons. The prison had a way of trying to maintain order in it, and they would keep you in the. If you were found guilty of breaking a prison rule, they would keep you in the cell 23 hours a day. Out of the 24, they'd send you less food. Sometimes the food would be 3 or 4 days old. Their idea of complying with the court mandated 1 hour a day recreation minimum was putting you in a small caged area while you were on that status. You could not go. You could not purchase hygienic and grocery items while you were on that status. You could not use the phone. So whenever because I always attempted to defend myself, but as far as the prison was concerned, that meant that I was fighting, and so I was subjected to those sanctions as well. It seemed like the prison was always trying to deter visitors. I mean, first of all, they would send prisoners who are from the city to the prisons that were in the country, and the prisoners that were from the country would be sent to the city. So, it was 4.5 hours away. So
Right.
that's a significant obstacle in terms of visitation, the length of the visit. And of course, that obviously increases the expense of visitation. But then
Yeah.
also, the whole visitor processing, the way that they did that, it was a very slow process. They tried to harass people. They tried to discourage visitors from coming. Often when I would get into the visiting room, when I would have a visitor, I mean, for the most part, I did the time by myself, but I did have, but that's overall. But to get into the nitty gritty of it, I mean, I did have, my mother did come to see me during some portion of the incarceration, and she would sometimes tell me when I get in the visiting room, "Where were you? I've been waiting here 45 minutes. I've been
Oh my
sitting here
gosh.
waiting for you for an hour and a half already." God forbid if we got caught in the count. Like if you weren't in the visiting room at 11 o'clock, I would have to wait 2.5 hours for them to then let me to get in. So all these different things were a means of trying to discourage visitation, which really society as a whole pays for that. Because, and what I mean by that is having community ties, having strong family ties is a factor which can aid formerly incarcerated people returning back to a society and leading a crime-free life. So we want prisoners to get visits. We don't want them to just be isolated, because that's just going to turn people into angry and bitter, and that could lead to crime. So we lose when that happens. But
Yeah.
yet, nonetheless, those practices went on. I was subjected to that. My grandmother passed away while I was incarcerated, so I lost her. My brother, who was 3.5 years younger than me, he came to see me 3 times in 16 years, not at all in the last decade. Kids in the school bus and in the school used to tell him that his brother is a rapist and other nasty things, and they would try to hit him and stab him with pencils. So being unable to get to me, I guess he was the next.
He was the
He was the
next
next.
hit.
He was the next best. Yeah, he was the next best thing. So those factors, the food was terrible. I mean,
Oh
sometimes it was
God.
burned. Sometimes it was burned. Sometimes it was not fully cooked. At still other times, there was issues with respect to the portion size that was being
Oh,
served
always.
by the prisoners.
Hmm.
There was a lot of verbal abuse, and on the part of the guards towards the prisoners, and it didn't seem to me like any type of earnest effort was made by the security in order to tamp down, if not mostly eliminate, the prisoner on prisoner violence that went on there. It didn't seem like there was much of an effort. At times they would facilitate that. They would put known enemies in the same cell
In the same
block, and
cell.
yeah, and then they would, hey, the guy in 5 cell is a snitch, or the guy over there up on another gallery, that
Yep.
he's a sex offender, and saying things and facilitating prisoners to fight other prisoners just for their
Just for their,
entertainment.
yeah.
Yeah. So there were those aspects of it. Removal of college education from prison. I mean, they took even that silver lining from me when they cut that. So all that stuff was part of my what I was subjected to, part of my prison experience. The way the prison administration administered the sex offender training program. So the parole board wants to see applicants take some sort of therapeutic program recognized by the state that purports to address the crime for which you're incarcerated. Hence, them wanting me to take an aggression replacement training program and the sex offender training program. So I completed the aggression replacement training program, but the problem with my taking the sex offender training program was that there was a guilt admission requirement tied to it. So the same way like in AA, you have to admit you have a problem in order to progress in the program. They wanted everybody to admit guilt to the
But you
instructor, to the
weren't
other
guilty.
prisoners, right? And to not just say you're guilty. They want a complete description. A verbal rendition wouldn't cut it. They wanted everything in writing. And so failure to complete any aspect of that would result in immediate removal from the program, with
And
the
then you
person being
don't,
deemed to have refused to complete it. So I refused to take the program
but then
because
you
the way
don't
that
meet
they
your
administered it that way.
requirements then, right?
Yeah, you understand the catch 22. You
Oh,
picked up on it.
it's
And
nasty.
right, and that's similar to that same catch 22 position I faced when I went to the parole board. So in reality, by law and by statute, the parole board is supposed to evaluate whether a prisoner's been rehabilitated, whether if released, they would live and remain at liberty without breaking the law. That's what they're there to assess. Okay, but what's happened over time is they have this obsession. They want to hear remorse expressed. They want to hear you take responsibility. They want to hear you have insight into your behavior, and failure to do that, but instead to assert your innocence, you know, uh, poses a very significant obstacle to even getting released. So I tried to, and then on top of that, many prisoners, anyone that was there for a violent crime, rather than having rehabilitation assessed, I saw many people that had bachelor's degrees, completed therapeutic programs, vocational trades, role model prisoners, some of them literally living in honor block, be denied parole over and over again,
Over. Just
based
over.
only, you were convicted of this crime and that crime. But look, I know that's why I'm here. This is why I was sentenced. This is why I did my time. If
I'm
all
not
that
my
it's going to
crime.
be right, if all it's going to be about is what I did in the first place, then that's a complete abandonment of any idea of rehabilitation and belief in a second chance. But I saw prisoners get denied parole many, many times based on that dynamic. And so knowing that, I kept raising the issue of my innocence at the parole board, but because I maintained that innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, that was a big factor in my being denied parole, along with them citing that same nature of the crime. So I was denied parole based on that. So that was yet another thing
Oh, I
that
bet
I
they were
was
mad.
that was another thing that I was subjected to. I mean, Shai, they ended the parole interview. At the end of everything, they asked me a question about an aggression replacement training program, and I was able to give them the answer. And that's when a different commissioner, because there was like 3 parole commissioners, and one of them piped up and said, "Well, that's good, Mr. Deskovic, because you're going to need those skills once you return back to society. Good luck." So the procedures, they mail you the decision 3 days later via institutional mail. So considering how that interview ended, I walked around the prison for the next 3 days thinking that I somehow defied the odds that I would be going home. And when I got their decision in the mail, it noted that I had an excellent educational record, a good disciplinary record, that I had some letters of support, including from a prison employee, but that nonetheless, I was found guilty of a brutal and senseless crime and to release me would to lessen the seriousness. And they ordered me to appear in front of them 2 years later. So I
Why?
was,
For
so that
what?
was exactly, so getting terrible medical care, was par for course. And come on, who's going to really suggest with a straight face that being subjected to terrible medical care, that should be part of the sentence? That's part of the punishment for your crime. Who would ever
Right.
suggest that, right? It's unseemly, but yet it's what we as a society allow to go
Yes.
on in prison. So I remember one day, and then we'll move to a different topic. There was a prisoner there. Sanchez was his last name, and I remember I knew him for a number of years. We took a bunch of programs together, and we were friendly. We used to chit chat, and one day I met him. I was coming back from the program, and he was coming back from the medical care, and he was walking in a very slow, laborious manner, and I could see the sweat coming from his forehead, and he didn't look right. And I asked him, hey, yo, you okay, man? What's going on? Do you want me to help you walk? What you gotta go get some medical care. You gotta go to sick hall. And he said, I was just there. I told them my chest is killing me. Right? They said I was fine. They gave me some Tylenols and told me come back tomorrow, but I feel like I'm dying.
Heart
But
attack.
he was dying. Like that night, he died of a heart attack
Heart
in
attack.
in his cell.
Every
Yeah,
day. I've seen it. I actually had a friend pass away, and that her ultimate death was because of her hypertension. They
just untreated.
uncontrollable,
And
untreated.
then another aspect of it, so they have what's called compassionate release. So
Yes.
meaning that if a prisoner has been determined to be terminally ill, a determination made, by the way, by the medical staff hired by the prison. Okay, just to be clear, not a prisoner's doctor on the outside, but the quack medical team. So if a prisoner is determined to be terminally ill, then they can put in for compassionate release,
Yes.
meaning that they would be released from prison so that they could die with a little bit of dignity in a free environment with their friends and friends and family. And I knew people that worked in the hospice care in the prison, other prisoners that were working there with it. And they would tell me stories about by the time the bureaucracy got around to making a decision on the compassionate release, either the person had like 1 or 2 days left, so they were released and they died a day or two left, or sometimes decisions would come to the prison granting compassionate release after the prisoner
After
had
the
died
death.
already, after the death already. So again, these are all brutal and extreme conditions. Okay, there's no bleeding liberal heart here with respect to these issues. These are just a matter of basic human dignity, right and wrong, federal and state constitutional right, simple decency. These are all things that are should be unacceptable to all of us that become aware of it, regardless of where you're at politically.
Right.
So these are all things that are unacceptable, and so this is all part of things that I talk about in conviction. So,
I can't
but
wait.
all that was part of the that was all part of the experience of being incarcerated as well. I mean, we talked about the sex offender training program. I mean, they did everything. The prison officials did everything in their power to try to force me to take that program. For
That's
example,
awful.
for example, I wanted. I was when you reach within certain amount of years. It's now in New York. It's now within 7 years. When you're within 7 years of going to the parole board, then as long as you don't have a bad disciplinary record, and as long as you're not deemed to be a security threat, your security level is supposed to drop. So
Right.
you would be entitled to be transferred. You should be transferred from a maximum security prison to a medium, which is a lot less restrictive, and it's a way kind of like of stepping down to the eventual release to society. So because I kept refusing to take the sex offender training program, they refused to drop my security level. So I stayed there because I stayed the max. Because I refused to take that program, they refused to transfer me closer to home. So ordinarily, if you go a year without a misbehavior report, you're allowed to put in a request to be transferred to a prison closer to home, which facilitates visitation, has the other benefits we talked about. So I spent a decade straight, 4.5 hours away from home in Elmira, because they refused to transfer me closer to home. Why? Because I did not take and complete that program. That was another aspect of it. They had what was called the Family Reunion Program in New York. So there's physical trailers that are located on the prison grounds. Typically, it's 3 or 4 of them. Mm-hmm. And so your visitor could come on a Friday in the morning. They could bring groceries from the outside. And as the prisoner, you would stay with them in the trailer on the prison grounds from Friday morning up until early Sunday morning. So you can have, so that's Family Reunion Program. So it could be your parents or your brothers and sister, or it could be if you're married, it could be with your spouse. It could be like a conjugal visit as well. And they had the cooking facilities there, and you could watch TV and read and be like and listen to music and be kind of like in a right. But no, so I wasn't married. I just wanted to have a family. I wanted to participate in the program with my mother.
Mom, yeah.
But of course, because I refused to take the sex offender training program, they would not allow me to participate. And in fact, one time I was on the visit with my mother, and this correction officer comes up to us with the decision on a piece of paper. He handed it to my mother and said, your request to participate in the Family Reunion Program has been denied, Mrs. So-and-so, because your son refused to take and complete the sex offender training program. And he walked away. And then he walked away. Yeah, leaving us to deal with that.
Whoa. He crossed the line on that one a little bit.
I agree. But I'm just giving there's just little examples of ways in which they did everything in their power to try to force me to take and complete that program. So that was all part of what I what I endured.
And I just wanted to remind the listening audience that he's not guilty.
I was innocent the whole time.
He's really for real. That's right, for real. Not guilty. I wouldn't take it either. And you're not going to make me, no way. Good for you. Boy,
that was one of the best decisions, to not take that program and to not cave at the parole board. That was probably one of the best decisions I ever. It was definitely hard for sure. Hard. It was very hard, yeah, but one of the best decisions I ever made, and I paid for that. I took a stand. And, I stood up as a man, and I stood on my ethics. I paid for that. I did an extra year in prison that perhaps I wouldn't have done had I told them what they wanted to hear. Maybe I would have made parole. Maybe not, because of the other dynamic I mentioned. But certainly that hurt my odds in doing that. But look, as it turned out, in the end, I won. At the end, I did an extra year. I did it. They got that from me. But then again, I came home as a free person.
That's right.
In court. And had I admitted guilt in that program, or had I admitted guilt at the parole board, that wouldn't look right. But there's been other people. There have been other people that have went the opposite way on that, and they did falsely admit guilt at the parole board in order to slightly increase their chance of being. And ultimately, when their conviction was overturned, they had to, their case wasn't dismissed. They had to go back to trial. And guess what additional piece of evidence the prosecution had in order to try to obtain a conviction again?
I'm sorry, I'm scared to know.
The statements that were made at the parole board. Well, you
Oh,
went to the parole board. And
oh,
you said
buddy,
you said you were guilty at the parole board. You
you set
said you were
yourself up.
sorry. You said you were sorry. So knowing that that was in play, I didn't. That was another act. That was another important aspect of why I didn't tell them that. But it was
And
all a
that,
horrific.
folks, is called the okey doke right there.
It really is. I mean, in that situation, I mean, you might say I couldn't win for losing, type of thing. Yeah, right, right. But that was all. That was all part. That was all. That was all part. That was all part of my experience while during the 16 years that I was wrongfully incarcerated.
Wow. Jeffrey, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on today. And you got a great smile. There it is. I hope you have a great weekend. Now, is there anything else that you would like to tell the audience today before we close this out?
Yeah, I would. So, from the sum total of my life, the difficulty in being wrongfully incarcerated and the struggle to be exonerated, the difficulty in reintegrating, which we'll talk about next time, and uh, and all the difficulties I've had, the sum total of everything. I've come up with, because I'm a deep thinker and I'm out of the box thinker, and I often think about things 4 or 5 different ways before finalizing on a conclusion. So I think all those things leads me to this equation here for overcoming adversity, and I'd like to share this with the audience,
Please.
which would be have a goal, have a realistic plan. Meaning, you should be able to look at your plan 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, "Yeah, maybe this could work." And think about it. It makes sense, because who wants to have hope and execute a plan that you don't think can be
And work.
successful? Be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan's not the goal. The plan is the route to get there. So if an unexpected door opportunity opens for you, which brings you towards that goal, you got to open that door and walk through it. You don't say, well, this wasn't part of the plan, and reject it. Another thing is no excuses. So there might be reasons why something is harder for you, but don't accept any reasons why or excuses why you can't get something done. And don't be afraid of hard work. So probably your goal, or overcoming your adversity, which often is the goal, is not going to just simply drop on your lap just because, or because that would be right. No, it's going to, you have it more often than not, nearly all the time, I dare say. You have to work for it. You have to put yourself in position for a miracle to happen, for someone to give you a hand up, for a door to open. So you have to work real hard. How hard you really want this goal. Like in sports terms, leave it all out on the field. Okay, no regrets, no lookbacks. And lastly, never give up. So when I reached different points in time where I couldn't go on anymore, I said to myself, this might be the key moment right now. I might be on the verge of a breakthrough, but because I quit, it's not going to happen. So even though I can't go on anymore, I'm run down and tired, I'm going to keep going anyway, just to see what happens. And then once you break through, once you come out on the other side, you have to reach back and help people similarly positioned. And you need to do some work on the preventative side also, in terms of preventing other people from experiencing, what you do. I know that goes far beyond wrongful incarceration. It goes beyond just, I mean, I've seen people who were rightfully convicted, rightfully incarcerated, and now they work to divert others from a life of crime, from ending up in prison. I've seen homeless people who are not homeless anymore, who are now working with homeless populations. I've seen women who formerly were domestic violence survivors who now help women in the same position. I was at a fundraising event strictly as an audience member. There was a woman who started a nonprofit. She had been sexually trafficked, now sharing her story, raising money so that other women currently in captivity in that way could be could be rescued. I've seen people do that, that victims of whether it's sexism, racism, discrimination, somebody that has a debilitating illness. So I know that that message applies to those other extreme walks of life, and anything else less major or more, it applies to that. And if you can do that, if you can reach back to those same populations, if you can do some work on the preventative side, it'll make your suffering count for something. It'll be meaningful. It'll be healing. It'll be cathartic. It'll make the world a little bit better. So that's really that's the key to not allowing anything to break you. To when you come across some extreme adversity, it can break you, it can destroy you, or you can triumph over it. You could reach a point of enlightenment. And with that, I've chosen the latter, and I have a sense of inner peace about me. I know that without a shadow of a doubt, this is why I went through what I went through. This is my purpose in the world. I understand my place in the world, and that helps me there. And on a similar basis, I'm not I know that, if I'm angry or bitter, then I can't live the meaningful life that I want to have. If I'm angry or bitter, then I feel like I already lost so much as is.
Yeah.
Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life? And
Lose
perhaps
more.
less nobly, it's not like I would be impacting the people that were responsible anyway. I would really be the only loser in that scenario. So for all those reasons, I'm not an angry or bitter person. So I wanted to share all those things with the audience. And perhaps one final note will be, I appreciate the small things. So I like feeling the sun on my face. I like fresh air. I like freedom of movement, travel, being outside when it's dark. These are things that most of us, including myself, prior to this happening to me, really took for granted. I love the opportunities that are in the world, how it's really not limited by what program the prison offers, or lots of opportunities in the world. But man, you gotta want it. You gotta work for it. But that's my message for everybody. And those are my final thoughts. And
Well, I love your final thoughts.
Hopefully,
You're definitely.
I'll come back for too long, and I'll share I'll share more of the ins and outs, my legal odyssey. I mean, things like arresting. How did I get arrested? What was the trial like? How did I end up wrongfully convicted? What was the failures?
Right.
It was a really wild ride. And what were the appeals? What were the injustices I suffered that way? How was I ultimately exonerated? What about difficulties in reintegrating? What was it like being released with nothing, waiting 5 years before I got any compensation? So all those are facets that we'll talk about in the next time you have me on. But it'll be wonderful, I'm sure.
Can't wait, and I can't wait to meet you in person. And
yes.
You know what? I choose the latter, and I'm going to make my suffering count for something too. And when you said breakthrough, I threw my hands up because I just posted something yesterday, I think, that said, I know that I'm about to have a breakthrough because I'm on the verge of giving up. I'm right there. I'm struggling so much, but my breakthrough's coming, and I'm not going to give up. And thank you for that reminder. Jeffrey, it has been a pleasure. You guys, that is a wrap. It has been a pleasure having you in tonight. I know that you got a lot of information tonight. Please check him out. Check out the foundation, and definitely patreon.com. That's on the bottom. I'll put them up in the descriptions. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. And remember, peace or pain, it's your decision every day. You guys have a blessed day.